Lord, may the words of my mouth and meditation of each and every one of our hearts be acceptable in your sight, for you are our strength and our redeemer. There's a story told of a very, very rich man. And he was ill and was getting close to death. And he knew he was going to be dying soon. He had a lot of wealth, and it meant an awful lot to him. So he tried to figure out a way where he could take some of his wealth with him to heaven. People told him that can't happen, that doesn't work that way, but he insisted. So what he ended up doing was taking a bag of gold, tying it to his wrist. And he laid down and he died. Came to the pearly gates and St. Peter was there. And St. Peter sees the bag attached to his arm and he said, people have been trying to bring stuff with them for years and nobody's ever been able to do it. And you have succeeded in that. Let me see what you brought. And St. Peter looks in the bag and says, you brought pavement? Streets of gold, of heaven are paved with gold? When the joke got bombs like that. Yeah, the reason I told that story, as badly as it went over, was because it illustrates something. It illustrates the fact that what you and I in this world put value on are not the things that are considered valuable from a kingdom perspective. Jesus alludes to that in his parable. He says this rich guy, he's, bumper crop this year, the barns are too small, I'll build big barns and I'll be happy for my whole life, and he dies the next day. What good did all that stuff do for him? Jesus says, be on guard, and Paul talked about this too, be on guard against all kinds of greed. All these things, and he lists a whole bunch of them, that are things that are pursued on this earth, but things that are ultimately unimportant or even negative. Amassing personal power and prestige is looked on as being something positive. But in the vast majority of cases, amassing personal power and material possession of things of that come at the expense of relationship. You see many wealthy people, they get married when they're younger, and they get divorced, and remarried and divorced, and remarried and divorced, and remarried and divorced. And I've been married 33 years. I know some of you folks have been married a lot longer than I have. But when I mention to people I've been married 33 years, they're like, wow, that's a really long time. And that's kind of sad because it means that people are used to people breaking up long before that. We live in a society that is based upon selfishness. I got to get what's mine. Taking care of number one. Pulling myself up on my own bootstraps. Right? My car is 2 years old. I need to get a new one because it's no good anymore. We used to say when we were in sales, the people that had the big Mercedes or big BMWs, which were luxury cars at the time, and this guy would show with a new one every time. We used to joke that he would trade his car in when the ashtrays got full. And these folks thought that that was what made them important, and what gave value to their life. I started with a rep firm, which what we did is we represented furniture manufacturers in New York metropolitan area. My territory was New Jersey, north of Trenton, and we went out onto Long Island, and we had the city and boroughs in Orange County. And when I started, the company had been formed by a Hungarian immigrant. The company was named by him. It was his name. And he was kind of transitioning towards retirement. His daughter had married. She married a young man who had worked for IBM. And now he was getting into the family business, and he was training me. Because he had New Jersey territory and the Manhattan territory. And what happened was I was to take over New Jersey territory. So we would go out together and go into Jersey, meet some of the dealers, then spend the next day in New York. Well, his wife wanted to get him something that was important to him, and that was a Rolex watch. So when we went out, when we were in the city, Now we're supposed to spend all day calling on dealers. You know, you go to this dealer, you leave this one, you go to the next one, you go to the next. We'd go to a dealer, we'd go to a second one, then we'd go over to the jewelry district, and he'd sit there and look at Rolex watches for the next couple hours. And he finally picks out the watch that he wants. And his wife gets him the watch that he wants. We're in Chicago at a trade show. There were two different trade shows. There was one that was based on designers, very, very high end, and then there was one that was the stationery show, because we sold to the upper end of that market as well. And most of the rep firms knew each other. And so we're sitting at a table having dinner, and he's got his watch on. He's wearing a jacket, long sleeve. He keeps doing this, so his watch keeps coming out of the thing, putting it on the table, and he'd do this again, he'd put it on. And one of the guys, I don't know if he saw the watch or not, but he said, you know, one of the things I can't stand is these people who flash fancy watches and pens and things of that nature. Guy takes his wrist, puts it in. Those kind of things are what we look on as symbols of status and power and authority and importance. And they don't matter in the kingdom. Is it bad to have a Rolex watch? No. I've got a friend who's a pastor. Very spiritual guy. Don't question his commitment to God at all. He drives a Mercedes-Benz, it is used. He has a Mont Blanc pen in his jacket. He has a Rolex watch. He's a single man. He tithes. He does all those kind of things. And for him, these things give him pleasure, but they're not his center. If you have to get rid of them, he'd regret it, but it wouldn't kill him, because they aren't what is his priority. They're just some things that give him pleasure. You know, I like Star Trek, especially Star Trek Next Generation. In the first season of the show, there was an episode where they come upon this old Earth ship from like the year 2015, 2016, someplace around. And the android character Data and the Klingon character Worf go over to survey this ship and find out what's going on. And they're going through it, and they find this door, and they finally found the thing that opens the door, and they go in, and there's all these what are called cryotubes. And in these tubes are frozen people. People who have been put in suspended animation. Most of them, the things had malfunctioned over the years, but there were 3 where the people were still alive in this suspended animation. And they bring them back to the ship, and the doctor revives them. And it turns out that these people were from like 2015, 2020, someplace around there, where there was a flirtation with the idea that if you got a disease that was incurable, what they could do is freeze you, and then later on when they come up with a cure for that disease, they can thaw you and then make you healthy. And each one of them had some kind of disease, and by the 24th century Star Trek time, they had cured these, so they cured them all. Interesting characters. One was a woman who was a mother and a wife who didn't want this, but her husband had this done to her. And her explanation was, he just couldn't stand the thought of me not being around, so he did this without asking me. I wish he never did. And her story was basically about trying to find some place to fit when everybody she knew for her whole life had been dead for hundreds of years already. Second guy was this country music singer guy. He had cirrhosis of the liver. He was ready to die. He partied and did all those kind of things. Interesting character. Wanted to talk to Data about setting up a party on the ship because he was bored and stuff like that. The third guy was this very, very wealthy guy. What he had done was he had taken all of his wealth and money and invested it through a brokerage firm so that it would increase. And he kept saying that he needed to contact his broker to find out what had happened to his money, how much it had grown, how wealthy he was. And Captain Picard explains to him, we've done away with things like poverty and hunger and the need for financial possessions. And you could see it hit this guy upside his head because his entire existence was wrapped around accumulating stuff. And this really shocked him. And his question was a really, really good question. And I think it applies to us as kingdom members. Well, if attaining money and possessions is no longer done, then what is the challenge in life? What is the challenge? I love Picard's answer. His answer was to improve yourself, to become a more complete human being. And I think that's something that you and I can strive for as well. Now, I don't know what Captain Picard's standard was for a more complete human being. But I know that when the Bible talks about being complete and healed and full in everything, it is striving to be more Christ-like, to live a more kingdom life. Rather than focusing on getting stuff, focus on giving stuff away. You know, John Wesley became very, very wealthy during his lifetime. What happened was, he was an Anglican priest of the Church of England. And he, after he had his Aldersgate experience, his conversion experience, he started preaching that wealth is not a positive in the kingdom. That if anything, if God has a preference for anyone or any group, it is a preference for the poor. Well, what happened was, in the churches of England at the time, you wanted to sit up front in this pew, the ones that are empty. You wanted to sit in the front pew because it showed status and power. And to sit in the front pew, you had to fork over a pretty fair amount of money. This pew was a little bit less. This pew was a little bit less. So your status in the community was reflected in where you sat because you could afford to pay for that pews. That's why when you, if you've ever seen anything about the Free Methodists, one of their things in their statements, free pews. That's what it's referring to. Well, when Wesley started getting up and preaching that the rich are not special in the kingdom, how do you think the priests who are running the churches that relied on these people for their money to support the church and their lifestyle, which is fairly lavish, felt about that? He got banned from pulpits in England. He was an ordained Anglican priest, and he could not preach in an Anglican church. So when he had his conversion experience, and he started training preachers, not clergy, but lay preachers, to go out and preach, what he did was he built his own preaching houses, his own chapels. Why? Because nobody could ban his preachers from him then. And he personally held title to all of these properties. So as the movement grew and they built more and more preaching houses, Wesley became wealthier and wealthier and wealthier. When he died, all the powers he reserved to himself went to the annual conferences. That's the root of the trust clause. It says all Methodist property is held in trust for the annual conference. Wesley said in one of his sermons to the people called Methodists, earn all you can so that you can save all you can, so that you can give away all that you can whenever you can. Wesley died poor because he had given everything away. Because he understood the things of the kingdom, the things that are important in this life are not the monetary things and the power things that society constantly shoves down our throat. Regardless of what Gordon Gekko says, greed is not good. Greed is toxic. Greed destroys families. It destroys relationships. Quite frankly, it destroys society. Now look at ancient Greece. Greed and hedonism destroyed one of the greatest societies that's ever existed on earth. Makes me wonder, since greed has taken such a central part in our society, over the last, I want to say, several generations, not just those people today, and what is the future of our society. But regardless of what that is, you and I are called to a higher standard. To not order our lives around the accumulation of things, around greed, around money and power and prestige and all that garbage. But rather to order our lives about the concerns of God. What does the Lord require of you? To do justice, to love mercy, to walk humbly with your God. Those are the priorities. Those are the things that should be at the forefront. Let's pray. Lord God, we give you thanks for everything you do and for the ways in which you have included us in your mission. We constantly feel ourselves, God, being pulled towards these unhealthy things. Part of the problem is that having things in this society is necessary and we can't live without them. God, help us to guard against them taking the place that belongs to you alone. And becoming a purpose for our lives rather than a means by which to live it. Thank you for your constant presence. Thank you for your example in Jesus Christ. And we thank you for your love that surrounds and envelops us at all times and in all places. And God, when we think of that love, we strive to emulate that love, our hearts turn to the situations that folks we know are in. People who are suffering in all different kinds of ways, whether it's medical or financial or emotional or relational. And so as our hearts turn to those folks we know who are in those places, we come to you raising their names. That because of your love, that your Spirit might envelop them, and that you might also use us as your arms to let them know in the midst of their struggles they are. For all who have been damaged by the extreme weather we have been experiencing lately, Lord, in your mercy,